Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Tonight we are going to slow down together and spend some time with a set of very old stories. They come from a tradition called Buddhism, and they carry a name you may never have heard before: the Jātakas. The word is old and it is soft, and it simply means birth stories. Stories of a birth, and then another birth, and then another after that. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen. You do not need to believe anything, or remember anything, or figure anything out. There is nowhere else to be, and nothing to solve. There is only a voice in the dark, and a long, slow river of gentle stories, and your own breathing, growing quieter as the minutes pass. Before we begin, if you feel like it, you might leave a small note in the comments, just what time it is where you are, and where in the world you happen to be lying down tonight. Some of you are listening in the middle of the afternoon, in a country where the sun is high. Some of you are far past midnight, in a room where the only light is the small glow of a screen. It is a quiet comfort to know that all over the world, at every hour, people are settling in to the same soft stories at the same time. You are not alone in the dark. You never really were. So take a slow, deep breath now. Let it go slowly, without any hurry, the way a tide goes out. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Let your shoulders come down from where they have been sitting all day, up near your ears. Let your jaw soften. Let the small muscles around your eyes let go. Wherever you are, however this day has treated you, let yourself settle in. Thank you for joining us here at Relaxing Subjects. Let us begin. There is a very old idea in the tradition these stories come from, and it is a gentle one. The idea is that a single life is not the whole of anything, that a being is not made all at once, in one lifetime, the way a house is built in one summer. Instead, the tradition says, a soul returns. Again and again, in one form and then another, learning something small each time. The way a child learns to be kind, not in a single afternoon, but over 1,000 quiet, ordinary days. And there was one particular being, the stories say, who was on his way across many, many lifetimes to becoming something rare, to becoming a Buddha, a word that simply means one who is awake, one who has woken all the way up out of the long dream of restlessness and wanting into a great and peaceful clarity. But he was not awake yet, not in these stories. In these stories, he is still on the road, still becoming. And while he is on that road, still travelling toward that great awakening, he has a different name. He is called the Bodhisatta. It is a long word, and you do not need to hold on to it, but it is a beautiful one, and it means the being who is on the way to being awake. The one who is becoming. Think of him as a traveller, walking a very long road home, and each lifetime is a single day of that walking. One day he wakes as a deer, another day as a monkey, another day as a king, or a merchant, or a small brown hare in the grass, and in each of these lives, in each of these bodies, the same quiet choice keeps happening. The choice to be gentle, the choice to give when giving is hard, the choice to be patient when patience costs something, the choice to be kind to the very creature that means him harm. That is the whole secret of these stories, if a story can be said to have a secret. It is one soul, moving through many gentle lives, the same being returning and returning, wearing the shape of a deer, then an elephant, then a moon-white monkey, then a hare, and each time, quietly, choosing kindness. So that when you listen to them, one after another, you are not really hearing 500 different tales. You are watching one long life, told in pieces. One river, seen at 500 different bends. The water is always the same water. Only the shape of the land keeps changing. And there are, in the oldest of these collections, more than 500 of these lives. 547 in the traditional counting, though the old teachers were never very fussy about the exact number, and you should not be either. They are gathered, these tales, in a corner of the Buddhist scriptures with a lovely, humble name, the Jātaka Nikya, which means, more or less, the collection of little texts, the small basket, as though someone long ago swept up all the shortest and most beloved things, the poems and the sayings and the birth stories, and set them together in one gentle heap and called it the little collection. And there, in the little collection, the 500 lives have waited for 2,000 years for someone to read them slowly in the dark. We will not hear all 500 tonight. Of course we will not. We will walk past only a handful of them, the way a person walking through a great gallery in the evening pauses at only a few of the paintings before the lights go down. But that is enough. You do not need all 500. You need only to feel the shape of the river and to drift a little way along it and to fall asleep somewhere on the water, trusting that it keeps flowing on without you. That is the good way to leave these stories. Half asleep, mid-current, certain that more lives are coming. So let us begin where the road is softest. Let us begin with a small brown hare. Long ago, the stories say, in a forest at the edge of a kingdom, the Bodhisatta was born as a hare, not a special-looking hare, not a golden one, not a giant one, just a hare, with long ears and a quick heart and soft grey-brown fur, the colour of a field in autumn. But this hare had a kind of gentleness in him that the other animals could feel, the way you can sometimes feel, without a word being spoken, that a person in a room is safe. And so the hare had made friends. 3 of them. A monkey, quick and clever, who lived in the branches, an otter, sleek and shining, who lived by the river, and a jackal, a small wild dog of a creature, who trotted the forest paths at dusk. The 4 of them were unlikely companions, a hare and a monkey and an otter and a jackal, but they had fallen in together the way friends sometimes do, without deciding to, and they kept each other company. And the hare, being the gentlest of them, and the one who thought the most, had taken it upon himself to teach the others. Not with lectures. He did not stand on a stone and preach. He simply lived a certain way, and spoke of it now and then, in the evenings, when the 4 of them sat together in the cooling air. And what he told them was very simple. He told them to be generous, to keep the days of fasting, the holy days, when a good creature eats a little less and gives a little more. And most of all, he told them that if ever a hungry traveller should come to them asking for food, they must give whatever they had. They must not turn a hungry stranger away. Now the monkey and the otter and the jackal could each keep this teaching without much trouble. The otter had fish, the monkey had fruit, mangoes ripening gold in the high branches. The jackal, being a jackal, could find scraps here and there along the paths. Each of them could give a hungry traveller something without giving up very much at all. But the hare ate grass. The hare ate the tender, green blades of the field, and the soft shoots, and the leaves. And who, the hare thought to himself, lying in the long grass one evening, who would ever want to eat grass? If a hungry traveller came to me, he thought, I have nothing to give him. Nothing a person could eat. Nothing but the grass, and no traveller in the world could be fed on that. And so the hare made a decision, a quiet, enormous decision, made all alone in the grass, without any fuss. He decided that if ever a hungry traveller came to him and asked for food, he would give the only thing he had that a traveller could truly use. He would give himself. He would offer his own body, his own small warm life, so that the stranger would not go hungry. He did not tell the others. He did not brag about it or make a show of it. He simply held the decision quietly in his heart and went on eating grass in the evenings and waited to see if the day would ever come when the offer would be asked for. Now, high above all of this, the stories say, in a place beyond the sky, there lived a great being, a king of the shining ones. His name was Sāñcī, and he was something like a god, though not the kind of god who made the world, only a very old and powerful being who watched over it and who sometimes came down when something rare was happening below. And Sāñcī could feel, all the way up in his high bright place, that something rare was stirring in that forest. He could feel the heat of the hare's quiet resolve, the way you can feel the warmth of a small fire from across a dark field. Such a resolve, in such a small and ordinary creature, was a rare thing, and Sāñcī wanted to see if it was real. Not to trap the hare, not to trick him for cruelty's sake, but to know, the way you sometimes want to know, past all doubt, that goodness in the world is truly what it says it is. So on the next holy day, the fasting day, when the 4 friends had each resolved to give food to any traveller who came, Sāñcī put on a disguise. He came down from his high bright place and put off all his shining, and took the shape of an old man, a tired old traveller, a wandering holy man, a beggar, footsore and thin and worn down by the road, with an empty bowl and a hungry look, and a voice grown weak from asking. And in this shape, this weary human shape, he came walking into the forest at the hour when the light was going gold and long. He went first to the otter. Old man, hungry, begging for food. And the otter, remembering the hare's teaching, brought him fish gladly and laid them before him. Sāñcī thanked the otter and moved on. He went to the jackal, and the jackal too gave what he had found. He went to the monkey, and the monkey came down through the branches with ripe mangoes, gold and heavy and sweet, and offered them without a moment's hesitation. 3 friends, 3 easy gifts, each one true and good in its own way, and Sāñcī received them all, and blessed each creature quietly, and moved on. And then he came to the hare. The hare, seeing the old man, the thin and hungry old man leaning on his stick, felt his heart go still and clear. Here it was. Here, at last, was the traveller. Here was the hungry stranger the hare had been waiting for all those quiet evenings in the grass. And the hare was not afraid, or if he was afraid, the fear was a very small thing beside the great clear certainty of what he was about to do. He came out of the long grass and stood before the old man, and he said, in the gentlest voice, that he had food to give, and that the old man should build a fire and wait, and that he would give him a meal such as he had never eaten. The old man, who was Sāñcī, built the fire. He gathered the wood and struck the spark and fed it until the flames rose up, warm and orange in the deepening dusk, throwing their soft dancing light across the grass and the trees. And when the fire was burning well, and the old man sat waiting beside it, the hare did a small thing first, a thing that tells you everything about the kind of creature he was. He shook himself 3 times, gently, so that any small living things that might be hiding in his fur, any tiny creatures, any insects, would be shaken loose and would not be harmed. Even now, even at this moment, he would not carry another life into the fire with him without its knowing. He would harm nothing that did not choose it, only himself, only his own small warm body, freely and gladly given. And then the hare, without a word of complaint, without a single hesitation, leapt into the fire. But the fire did not burn him. This is the part of the story where something in you can let go and rest, because the flames, which had been so warm, so bright, turned cold the very moment the hare touched them, cold as the water of a mountain stream, cold as fresh snow. The fire did not so much as singe a single hair on the hare's small body. He lay there in the heart of the flames, unharmed, whole, safe, wondering, and the fire was as gentle around him as a bed of cool grass on a summer morning. For the old man was not an old man at all. He was Sāñcī, king of the Shining Ones, and he had put off his disguise and stood now in all his old bright glory in the firelight, and the fire was his, and he would not for anything in the world have let it harm the creature that had offered so much. He had come to see if the hare's resolve was true, and it was true. It was as true as anything in the world had ever been. A small brown hare, who ate only grass, who had nothing anyone would want, had found the one thing he had to give, and had given it, gladly, all of it, the whole of his small warm life, and had asked for nothing back. And Sāñcī, looking down at the hare lying safe and cool in the untouched fire, wanted the whole world to remember this. He wanted the memory of it to last as long as the world itself lasted, and so he reached up, the stories say, into the night sky, and he took the mark of the hare, the shape of that small, generous creature, and he painted it onto the face of the moon, so that it would hang there, high and silver and safe, for everyone, in every land, in every age that was still to come, to look up and see. The hare, on the moon, the shadow of a small kind creature, set into the light, forever, and here is the gentle turn of this story, the part that is meant for you, tonight, wherever you are lying, because you have seen it. You have, on some clear night, at some point in your life, you have looked up at the full moon and seen the darker shapes upon its bright face, the grey shadows on the silver, and perhaps someone told you that they were seas, or craters, or mountains. But across a great part of the world, across all the lands where these stories were told, when a child looked up and saw those shadows, they were told something else. They were told, that is the hare. Look, there are his long ears. There is his rounded back. That is the little creature who gave everything he had, painted onto the moon, so that no one would ever forget how much a small and ordinary being can give. So the next time you cannot sleep, and you rise and go to the window, and the moon is full and high, look up. The mark is still there. It has been there, they say, for longer than any of us can imagine. Longer than the temples, longer than the empires, a small soft shadow on the silver, keeping its own quiet watch over everyone who cannot sleep. You are looked over. Even the moon is holding an old kindness for you, and you do not need to do anything with that, or make anything of it. You need only know it, and let it be, and let yourself grow heavier and warmer where you lie. That is the first of our lives tonight, the hare who became a mark upon the moon. And remember what we said at the start, it is one soul moving through many lives. The hare in the fire and the being on the long road toward becoming the Buddha are the same being. This was one of his days, one of his early, patient, generous days on the very long road home. Let us pause here for a moment now before we walk on to the next life. Take a slow, deep breath, in, gently, and out, even more slowly. Notice the quiet in the room. Notice the small weight of your own hands, wherever they are resting. Notice how the body, when you stop asking anything of it, begins on its own to grow soft and heavy and warm, like sand settling under still water. And before we go on, one small quiet thing, from me to you. For a long time, I was someone who lay awake, night after night, with a mind that would not stop turning, replaying the day, running ahead into tomorrow, so that morning would come and find me hollow and grey, and no more rested than when I lay down. And then, slowly, that changed. Deep sleep became possible again. And everything downstream of it changed too. Learning came easier. Energy came back, the real kind that carries you through a day. The mind stayed clear. Sleeping like a baby, it turned out, changed everything. If you would like to know the exact system that made that possible for me, it is there in the pinned comments, quietly waiting whenever you want it. There is no hurry. It will keep. And when you are ready, with no rush at all, we will continue together. Now the being who was the hare did not stay a hare. That life ended, as all lives end, gently in the telling, and the long road went on, and the same soul rose again into a new shape, in a new forest, on a new bend of the same slow river. And this time, the stories say, he was born as a monkey. But not an ordinary monkey. He was born as the king of the monkeys, the leader of a great troop, and he was enormous, far larger than any monkey you have ever seen, strong and wise and calm, with a body powerful enough to do a thing that no ordinary monkey could ever do. Remember that strength. It matters in a moment. He lived, this Monkey King, with his troop of some 80,000 monkeys, in the high forested hills beside a great river. The river was the Ganges, the wide and holy river that runs through that land, and where the monkeys lived, near its upper reaches, there grew a single tree unlike any other. A great mango tree, taller and broader than all the rest, standing at the water's edge, and each year it bore fruit of such sweetness, such size and fragrance, that no fruit in the world could match it. The Monkey King loved that tree, and his troop loved it, and each season they would gather in its branches and eat their fill of the finest mangoes anywhere beneath the sky. But the Monkey King was wise, and he saw a danger in it. He knew that the tree stood over the river, and that some of its branches hung out over the water, and that if even a single ripe mango were to fall into the current and be carried downstream to the great cities of men, then men would taste it, and want more, and come searching for the tree. And men, he knew, were not always gentle when they wanted something. So each season he gave his troop a careful instruction. Before the fruit ripened, they were to go along every branch that overhung the water and pick clean every flower, every tiny green bud of fruit, so that not a single mango could ever grow on the riverside of the tree and fall into the current and betray them to the world. And for a long time this worked. For many seasons the troop ate in secret, in safety, high above the river, and no fruit ever escaped. But one year, the stories say, one small mango was missed. A single fruit, hidden behind a bird's nest, or curled inside a folded leaf, grew and ripened unseen on a branch above the water, and when it was heavy and gold and ready, it fell. It dropped from the branch into the river, and the river took it and carried it down, mile after mile, past the forest and out toward the plains, down to where a great king of men had come to bathe in the holy water with his court. And the king of men found the mango. It came bobbing to him on the current, and he took it up, this strange golden fruit he had never seen, and he tasted it, and it was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten in his life. And at once, just as the Monkey King had feared, the king of men wanted more. He commanded his people to follow the river up into the wild hills, to find the tree this fruit had come from. And they found it. Of course they found it. They came at last to the great mango tree at the water's edge, and they saw its branches heavy with golden fruit, and they saw, too, that the tree was full of monkeys, 80,000 of them, feeding in its branches. And the king of men, being a king of men, wanted the fruit for himself alone, and was angry that the monkeys were eating it. So he gave a hard order. He commanded his archers to surround the tree in the night, and at first light to shoot the monkeys down, all of them, so that he might have the tree and its sweet fruit for himself. The soldiers moved into place in the darkness, ringing the great tree with their bows, waiting for the dawn. And in the grey hour before the light, the Monkey King woke, and saw. He saw the ring of armed men below in the shadows. He saw the arrows ready. He understood, in an instant, everything that was about to happen. 80,000 of his people, his whole troop, everyone he had ever led and loved, trapped in the branches of a single tree, with armed men waiting all around, and only one way out. And that one way out was terrible. For across the river, on the far bank, there stood another stretch of forest, close enough that a monkey might leap to it and be safe and free. But it was not close enough. The gap over the water was too wide for even the strongest monkey in the troop to leap and reach the far trees and live. The far bank meant safety, but the gap to it could not be crossed, except by him. The Monkey King was larger and stronger than any of his troop, and so, before the light came, before the arrows flew, he did a thing that only he could do. He gathered himself, and he leapt. He leapt out over the water, an enormous leap, the greatest leap of his life, out across that wide and deadly gap, and he reached the far bank, only just, and caught hold of the trees there. And then, holding fast to the far trees with his hands, he stretched himself back, out over the whole width of the river, reaching, straining every muscle in his great body, until his feet could just catch the tree on the near bank where his people waited. And there he hung, stretched to his very limit across the entire span of the water. His hands gripping the far trees, his feet hooked around the near ones, his own body pulled taut into a living bridge above the current, a bridge made of nothing but himself, and he called out to his troop, softly in the grey light. Come now, quickly, quietly. While there is time, run across my back. Run across me to the far side, to the forest, to safety, and go. And they came. One after another, the monkeys of his troop came out onto the living bridge of their king's body and ran across it, over the deep water, over the ring of waiting men, and leapt down into the safe trees on the far bank, and vanished into the forest, free, one after another. 80,000 of them, small feet running across his stretched-out back, each one a small weight. And then another, and another, hour by hour in the growing light, while the Monkey King held on, and held on, and held on, and said nothing but come, and quickly, and go, and be safe. He held the whole width of the river open for them with his own body, and one by one, every single one of his people crossed over him to safety, and lived. When the last of them had gone, when the last small weight had lifted from his back, and the last pair of feet had pushed off from his ribs and leapt into the safe trees beyond, the Monkey King let go. Not suddenly, slowly, the way a tide goes out. The great tension in his body simply released, and he lowered himself, still and quiet, down from the trees, and lay on the bank of the Ganges in the early light. He was still breathing, but only just. The king of Brasi had watched all of it from his boat on the river below. He had come with his men to take the mangoes, and instead he had watched this. He had watched a creature use itself as a bridge. Not one of his men, not a soldier, a monkey. And the king of Brasi felt something shift inside him that he did not have a word for, exactly a kind of recognition, a kind of grief that is also wonder. He had his men bring the monkey king down to the bank, gently. He sat beside him in the morning, quiet. And the monkey king lay there, spent, his eyes still open and calm, looking at the sky. And the king of Brasi asked him, why, he asked him, quietly, not as a challenge, but because he genuinely needed to know. You are a king too, he said. You could have crossed first. You could have saved yourself. Why did you make yourself a bridge? And the monkey king answered him, in what breath he had left. Because they were mine, he said. Because what is a king, if not the one who bears the weight, so others do not have to? I had everything I needed. I have had it always. And there at the end, with his people safe in the forest, and the river running below, and the sun coming up over the hills of the Ganges plain, the monkey king closed his eyes. The king of Brasi sat with him a long time. Then it was over. And then the story was over too. And what comes after the story, in the old telling, is the part that was always there, the quiet turn, the moment of recognition, the samodhana, when the teacher opens the present into the past and shows you that they were never separate. The monks sitting in the Jeta grove or the bamboo grove, having brought some difficulty or some question to the teacher, would hear this story from the past, this atavathu, this tale from another birth, told in the same unhurried way it was always told, and then at the end the teacher would speak the samodhana, the identification, and say, the king of Brasi in that time, that was Nanda. The monkey who fled first, the one who set off the panic, the one whose fear very nearly cost the others everything, that was Devadatta. And the monkey king who hung above the river and let them all walk across him to safety, that was I myself. That is I myself. 3 words. And in those 3 words a whole teaching arrives, not through argument, but through image. You have just spent all this time with a monkey king in the half-light above the Ganges, and now you understand something that a doctrine could spend 100 pages circling. The being who would become the Buddha was not learning generosity from a book. He was practicing it, lifetime by lifetime, in the marrow of lived experience. He practiced it as a hare. He practiced it as a monkey. He would practice it again as a deer, as an elephant, as a king, as a wandering ascetic in the high hills. Each life a lesson, not taught, but lived through, the way you learn to swim, not by reading about water, but by going in. And Devadatta. This name will come back. It comes back over and over in these stories, the way a certain kind of difficulty keeps returning in a life until the lesson it carries is finally understood. In the life of the historical Buddha, in the world the monks knew, Devadatta was a cousin, a fellow monk, a man whose ambition eventually led him to try to split the community, to cause harm, to turn away from the path he had walked partway down. And in the old stories, in the lives before, the one who played the role of that same difficulty, the greedy king, the treacherous hunter, the frightened monkey who ran, was again and again the same being, taking the same turn, learning the same hard things slowly. This is not cruelty in the telling. It is the opposite. It is the suggestion that even this, even the one who causes harm, is a being in process, moving slowly the way all of us are moving. Let us rest in that for a moment, and then let us walk a little further along the river of lives. There is another life. There is always another life. This one begins in a forest, Not the forests of the Ganges plain this time, but something older feeling, quieter. A forest with deep shadow and the smell of old leaves and water somewhere nearby. In this forest there lived a deer, not an ordinary deer, a deer whose coat was the colour of beaten gold, whose eyes were the dark of still water at night, whose antlers rose from his head like the branches of a young tree. A creature so beautiful that anyone who saw him for the first time stopped walking and stood very still, the way you stand when you have stumbled into something that seems to belong to a different order of things. This was the deer king, the Bodhisatta in one of his lives as an animal. The story is called the Nigrodhamiga Jataka, the Banyan deer tale, and also the golden deer story. The Ruru Jātaka in some tellings, and in all its tellings it begins the same way, with the golden deer king living in the forest, leading a herd of his own kind, caring for them with the patience and steadiness that seems to have been, in all his lives, the thing he practiced most naturally. Simply caring, simply showing up, simply staying. One day the king of Brasi, a different king, a different age, but always the same human difficulty, waiting to encounter the same animal patience. This king came hunting in the forest. He was the kind of king who was good at ruling in the ordinary sense, but whose appetite for hunting had grown into something closer to obsession. Every day he needed to go. Every day there needed to be something to pursue. When the king saw the golden deer king, he stopped his horse. He sat for a long time simply looking. He had never seen anything like it. And instead of drawing his bow, he did something rare for a man of his kind in that moment. He simply did not. He put up his hand and he told his men, "This one we leave. This one goes free." And he rode home. But the story was not done with him yet. Some weeks later, the cook in the royal kitchen received instructions from somewhere in the palace, from the king's favourite, a woman who had dreamed of eating venison, that the kitchen should produce a particular dish. The cook dutifully went to the forest to find a deer. Any deer would do. But in the confusion of the chase, the deer that stumbled into the trap was a pregnant doe, her belly round and low, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She lay in the net, and the cook approached her, and she trembled. Word of what had happened spread through the forest, the way news travels among creatures who live together and attend to each other. The golden deer king heard it. He sat very still for a moment in the deep shade of the trees. He was thinking, not in the way we sometimes rush through thinking, skipping steps to get to an answer we already prefer, but slowly, all the way through. He was seeing, in that stillness, something the trap doe could not see from inside her fear. That the doe was pregnant, that her time was very near, that if she died now 2 lives ended. He was also seeing something harder, that he, the golden deer, was the one the king had already promised to spare, that there was one creature in this forest the king would not kill. He rose and walked to where the cook was waiting with the net, and the doe looked up at him and said nothing, and he looked at her, and then he walked past her and presented himself to the cook in her place. "Take me instead," he said. "This one cannot die today. Take me." The cook stared at him. The cook recognized him, the gold coat, the dark eyes, the antlers like young branches. This was the deer the king had personally declared off limits. The cook stood between an impossible order and an impossible creature, and made the only decision a person with a decent heart can make in that position. He went back to the palace and told the king everything. The king came to the forest himself. He came quickly, which was not like him, and when he arrived and saw the golden deer still standing calmly between the net and freedom, he felt the same thing the king of Brasi had felt watching the Monkey King above the river. That wordless shift, that grief and wonder tangled together. "Why?" the king asked him. "Why would you do this?" "I gave you my word. You were safe." And the Golden Deer King answered him simply, "Because she could not die today. Because there were 2 lives in the balance and only one of me. I did what could be done." The king looked at him for a long time. He looked at the pregnant doe trembling in the net. He looked at his own hands. And then he did something that a king rarely does, which is to change. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but in the small, real, irreversible way that happens when you have seen something that cannot be unseen. He told his men to release the doe. He told them to release all the deer in the net. And then he went further. He granted what the old texts call abhaya, safety, the gift of fearlessness, to all the deer in the forest, to every deer, not just the golden one, not just the pregnant one. Every one of them, living in that wood or near it, would go unhunted from this day. Then, further still, the king, riding home, passed through his own city and found himself granting the same gift of fearlessness outward and outward to other animals and to all beings under his care who had been living in fear of arbitrary harm. The doe gave birth safely. The Golden Deer King returned to his forest, and the merit of what had passed between them rippled outward in the way that kindness ripples, slowly and further than you can see from where you are standing. When the monks heard this story from the teacher and the samodna came at the end, they understood. The pregnant doe was a woman from the present story who had needed protection. The king of Brasi was one of the monks who had needed to hear about change. And the Golden Deer King who stood in the net and offered himself, that was I myself. This is the shape the teaching always makes. Not a commandment, not a list of rules to remember, a life offered in story and the invitation simply to sit with it. And there is something worth sitting with here before we walk on to the next life. The word ahis, non-harm, the refusal to do violence, is sometimes spoken of as though it were primarily a philosophical position, a stance a person adopts after careful thought. But in these stories, it always arrives differently. It arrives as a consequence. The golden deer stands in the net, and the king is changed, not because someone argued a case for the value of life, but because kindness was simply, quietly, undeniably demonstrated in front of him. The deer did not lecture him. The deer simply stood there and offered himself, and the king's heart did the rest on its own. That is the teaching by story that the Jatakas practice in almost every tale. Not a sermon, a life. And the lesson embedded in what happened, waiting to be found. Let us walk on. There are more lives ahead, and not all of them ask you to give yourself away. Some of them simply ask you to think. This story takes place near a pool. A beautiful pool, deep in the forest, with clear dark water and the sound of birds and the smell of wet stone and green things growing at the edges. This pool, in this life of the Bodhisatta, was guarded by a demon, a water demon, a Jātaka in the old language, a being of great strength and considerable ill will who had claimed this pool as his territory. The arrangement was simple and brutal. Anyone who entered the water would be taken. Any creature who came to drink and stepped into the pool would be seized and dragged down and would not come up again. A troop of monkeys came to this forest thirsty. They were tired from a long journey through dry country, and the sound of water ahead was extraordinary to them, the most necessary sound in the world when you have been without it long enough. They could hear it, and they ran toward it. And then their king, the Bodhisatta, in this life as an ape, or in some tellings as a monkey of the capuchin kind, stopped them. He stopped them before they reached the pool. He stood at the edge of the trees, and he looked at the pool for a long time. He walked around its perimeter without entering the water. And he noticed something. He noticed the footprints. Footprints leading in. No footprints leading out. He turned to his troop and said, "We do not go in." The troop was thirsty. Some of them were very thirsty. They looked at the water, and they looked at their king, and they trusted him, because he had not yet been wrong in a way that cost them. The king walked further around the pool and kept looking, kept attending to details the way a mind made patient by long practice attends to details without forcing them. And he found what he was looking for. Reeds. Hollow reeds, growing at the edge of the pool, their stems long enough to reach from the bank to the open water. He picked one. He put it to his lips and blew. It was hollow all the way through. A drinking tube. He picked more. He picked enough. He brought them back to his troop and showed them what he had found, and one by one the monkeys of the troop lay at the water's edge, not entering it, not crossing the boundary the demon had made his killing ground, and drank through the hollow reeds from the safe bank, every one of them, thirsty no longer, not a single one taken. The demon in the pool, the story says, looked up from the depths at this development and felt something unfamiliar. He had never been outwitted before. He had always won through strength and surprise. He had no counter for this particular solution, for the patient mind that had looked at the problem from outside instead of walking straight into it. The story this tells is quieter than the bridge of a monkey king's body or the golden deer in the net. It doesn't ask for everything. It asks only for a moment of stillness before the obvious answer, long enough to find the better one. It asks for the wisdom to see a different approach, the willingness to say, "Wait, not yet, let me look first." In the old language, this quality that the Bodhisatta keeps practicing is called wisdom, not cleverness for its own sake, not the pleasure of being smarter than someone else, something simpler, the willingness to see clearly before acting. It is a a perfection, the same word the tradition uses for all the qualities the Bodhisatta kept slowly developing across all these lives. Wisdom, the kind that saved a troop of thirsty monkeys on an afternoon near a dangerous pool without any force at all. When the monks heard this one, the samodna at the end was simple and warm, the demon who was outwitted. He is such and such in the present story, and the monkey king who thought to try the hollow reeds, that was I myself. You begin to feel, after a while, the rhythm of this. The same being, the same heart, slightly different circumstances, slightly different test. Each time finding the kindest answer, or the most patient one, or the one that does the most good for the most beings. Not always arriving at it easily, not always without cost, but always arriving. This is what the three-part structure of the Jātaka stories is built to do, and it is worth pausing here in this quiet space between tales to understand how the structure works, not as information to carry away, but as a way of understanding why these stories feel the way they feel. Why they have the quality of something heard in the dark that stays with you even after you have stopped listening. Each Jātaka has three movements. The first is the story of the present, the pakapanavathu, if you want the ply word, which simply means the situation that is happening now, in the monastery, among the monks or the lay people who have come to the teacher with a difficulty. Something has gone wrong, or something has come up that needs seeing clearly. Someone has acted greedily, or someone is struggling with patience, or a student has given up on a task too soon. This is the present thread, the near shore. The second movement is the story of the past, the Atavathu. This is what we have been walking through tonight. This is the life remembered, the hare in the fire, the monkey king above the river, the golden deer in the net, the ape at the edge of the dangerous pool. These lives from before offered in answer to the difficulty of the present, not as examples to imitate, but as something more intimate, a way of showing that this difficulty is not new, that it has been faced before, that something came of facing it well. And the third movement is the samodhana, the identification, the revelation of who was who. The king was Nanda. The frightened one was Devadatta. The one who gave, who stayed, who thought first, that was I myself. This last movement does something very particular to the listener. It means that the gap between the ancient story and the present difficulty is collapsed. The being who hung above the Ganges as a bridge is the same being sitting here in the shade of the grove, teaching. The life of the hare is not a long-ago story about a different creature. It is a memory, as close as any of us are to our own past, just deeper than we are accustomed to going. The monks understood this not as mythology, but as testimony. This is what I did. This is how I came to be what I am now. Look, generosity practiced across 100 lives, patience held under 100 betrayals, wisdom built from 100 moments of stopping and attending to the reeds at the water's edge. The prams, the perfections, were not ideals written in a book. They were things done, things lived through. Nna, the quality of giving freely, practiced as the hare and the monkey king and the golden deer. Khanti, patience, the quality that holds steady under what is difficult, practiced as the deer in the net. Virya, energy and perseverance, practiced in the swimming that we will hear about before the night is over. Met, loving kindness, the quality that includes every being in its care, without exception, present in each tale as the simplest, most natural, most unconsidered part of what the Bodhisatta does. Not because he is thinking about Met, because Met is simply what he is becoming, the way a stone in a river becomes smooth, not by deciding to, but by what it is willing to endure. These qualities were never meant to be memorized as a list, they were meant to be felt through story. They were meant to enter you the way all good stories enter you, sideways, through the image, through the moment of a monkey king calling out in the grey light. Come. Come now, quickly, while there is time. Take a slow breath now. Let the back of your body settle a little more into what is holding you. Notice the quiet around you, or underneath the sounds around you, the layer of stillness that is always there if you give it a moment. Quick reminder, after years of lying awake with a racing mind, deep sleep finally became possible. Now learning comes easier, energy is real, and the mind stays sharp. Sleeping like a baby changed everything. If you want the exact system that made this possible, check the link in the pinned comments. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more thing to hold gently before we walk on, and it is this, Devadatta. He keeps appearing. This is not incidental. The Jatakas are very honest about the fact that in almost every life of the Bodhisatta there was also this other figure, the one who makes the difficulty, the one who takes the role of harm or greed or betrayal. In the tale of the Monkey King, it was the monkey who panicked and caused the harm. In later tales, it is a treacherous hunter, a jealous queen, a king who chooses cruelty. And the traditional telling consistently identifies this figure across the many lives as the same being, learning in the slow way, the hard way, through the consequences of what he keeps choosing. What the tradition offers about this is not judgment, it is something closer to compassion and also to realism. Some beings learn through the experience of doing harm. Some learn through the experience of receiving it. Some learn through watching. The river of lives is long enough for all of it. The teaching is patient enough for all of it. Devadatta, too, is on a path, just a longer, slower, more costly one. This is perhaps the most quietly radical thing about these stories. They do not divide the world into those who are capable of wisdom and those who are not. They divide it only into now and not yet. The being who runs in panic can learn to hold still. The being who betrays can learn to protect. It is only a matter of lives, and lives, like the river, keep coming. The monk in the Jataka grove who heard these stories and recognized his own past life role in the Samodhana, whether he was named as Nanda or as the frightened one, was meant to sit with that without shame. Without pride, either. Just the simple, steadying knowledge of where he was in the long walk. The teaching that arrives through the Samodhana is not, "You were the traitor, feel ashamed." It is, "We have all been in the net, in the fear, in the panicked run. And we have all, in some life, also been the one who stopped and held the bridge." The stories are told in the Jātaka Nikaya, the collection of shorter texts in the Pāli canon, and they number, in the traditional count, 547. But this number should not be understood as a library to get through. It is more like a river to sit beside. You do not go to a river with the intention of drinking it. You sit beside it and watch it for a while. And the watching does something in you that the counting never could. The three-part frame, Paccuppannavattu, Atthavattu, Samodhana, was not imposed on the stories from outside. It grew from how the teaching was actually used. A monk is troubled. A layperson asks a question. A community faces a difficulty. And instead of a doctrine being recited, a life is told. And at the end of the life, very gently, the present difficulty is reflected in the past story, and the person asking is not told what to do, they are shown what was done. And then the showing is over, and the silence comes, and whatever understanding is possible in that moment simply arrives on its own. This is as it happens. Exactly what these stories were used for in temples and villages and households across Buddhist Asia for 2,000 years. Not as scripture in the sense of something to be learned verbatim. As a living pedagogy. As the everyday teaching that travelled not in treatises but in carvings on gateways and painted panels on cave walls and shadow puppet performances at festivals and the quiet voice of a parent in the dark of a child's room, telling about a hare who threw itself into a fire. And look! There! Do you see it? That is the moon, and the mark on it is still there. We will come to the carvings, to the cave walls and the stone galleries, to Brute and Asi and the great mountain of stone in Java. We will come to them soon, in their own time. But first, one more story from this life of the river. One more figure stepping forward from the long procession of lives. Let us rest here for just a moment more, in the space the three-part frame opens, in the space between the story of the past and the identification of the present. This space has a particular quality to it, if you have ever sat in it, a kind of suspension, a moment where the past and the present are both present, and neither of them is rushing anywhere. The tale has been told. The lesson has not yet been named. The monk in the grove, the child in the dark, the listener here at the edge of sleep, all of them in that same held moment, attending. It is worth noticing that the Bodhisatta, across all these lives, never seems in a hurry to arrive. He does not appear to be measuring how much progress he has made. He does not compare his current life to the previous ones and find it lacking. He simply shows up fully in the life that is before him, as a hare, as a monkey, as a deer at the edge of a net, and does what can be done in that life with what is available. The perfections are not a curriculum with a graduation date. They are a direction, a way of moving through whatever life presents. There is something very restful about that. The idea that where you are right now is exactly where the practice happens. Not somewhere else, not in better circumstances, when things are easier, when you have more to work with. Here, in this life, even if this life is a hare's life, brief and small, and without much to offer but yourself, even then, especially then, the being who would become the Buddha understood this not once, but 547 times, in at least that many forms. And the stories kept because the people who heard them recognized themselves in them. Not as the golden deer or the monkey king, though those images lodge in the mind and stay, but in the difficulty, the hunger, the fear, the moment of choosing, the surprise of kindness arriving where you expected only harm. These are not ancient feelings. They are the feelings of anyone lying in the dark, carrying what this day has left them with, trying to find a way to set it down long enough to sleep. The stories know this. They were always already for you. For this. For the dark and the quiet and the mind that has stopped moving long enough to simply receive. So receive, if you can. Let the hare be the hare. Let the monkey king hang above the water. Let the golden deer stand calmly in the net while the cook tries to work out what on earth to do. Let them be exactly what they were, a being practicing, in the long, unhurried way. The qualities that would eventually bring a whole tradition into being. Na, Kanti, Pa, Met, given freely over and over, into lives that did not always appreciate them, toward a completion that was always further along than the present moment could see. And let yourself, if you can, be doing the same, in whatever way is available to you tonight, in this particular life, in this particular dark. Practicing whatever small version of patience or generosity or wisdom presents itself between now and sleep. That is all any of these lives were asking for. That is all. There is something worth resting in for a moment before the next story begins. These tales, the hare, the monkey king, the golden deer, were not written down and placed in a library to be found by scholars centuries later. They were not composed for quiet study. They moved first as breath moves, mouth to ear, night to night, one generation laying them gently into the next, the way you might lay a sleeping child down without waking them. And then, because the people who loved them wanted to keep them past the life of any single voice, they were put into stone. This is worth knowing. It changes what you are receiving tonight. Go back, if you can, 2,000 years. Go back to a hillside in what is now Madhya Pradesh, in the centre of India, where craftsmen were working in sandstone. They were building the great railings and gateways of a stupa, a dome-shaped monument raised over sacred relics, surrounded by a stone enclosure carved in a continuous program of scenes. The gates are called toras, and on those toras, in panels that are still standing now, Still readable now if you stand before them with patience, the Jataka stories appear. The Monkey King stretching himself across the gap, the deer turning to speak to the king's men, the hare at the fire, carved in a language that needed no explanation because everyone who came to walk that enclosure and pay their respects already knew these stories in their bones. And Sāñcī was not alone. At Brut, another ancient site, another set of carved railings from roughly the same period, the 2nd century before the Common Era, carried labelled panels of Jātaka scenes. Labelled. Someone took the care to inscribe the name of each tale beside the image so that even a pilgrim who had not heard a particular story could place it. A kind of archive in stone, built for people who moved through the world on foot, who might see a carving on a wall and want to know, which life was this? Which perfection? Which moment of turning? Then there is Ajanta. If Sikh is carved, Ajanta is painted. Cut into a horseshoe of basalt cliff in Maharashtra, these caves were excavated and decorated across many centuries, some as early as the 2nd century before the Common Era, others as late as the 5th century of the Common Era. The murals in those caves are among the most important surviving ancient paintings anywhere in the world. Not fragments, not faded suggestions, great continuous narrative scenes, covering walls and ceilings in colours that still carry warmth, ochre and lapis, and the deep green of things that grow near water. And among the scenes that cover those walls, many of them winding through the painted world, are the Jātakas, the Shadanta tale, which we will come to soon, the Mahjanaka, the Champeya, the Vesantara, painted as continuous narrative, scene flowing into scene without interruption, so that a person walking slowly through the cave, in the available light, lamplight, or the slant of what came through the carved opening, would move through a whole story the way you move through a dream, one moment dissolving gently into the next. There is a word for the practice of circumambulating a sacred monument, keeping it on your right, walking slowly in a circle around it in reverence. The word is pradaki. It is the same gesture a pilgrim makes at a stupa and at a carved cave and at a painted gallery. You walk. The story moves past you, or you move past the story. It is hard to say which. The images unfold in time and in space at once, and by the time you have completed the circuit you have been, for a few minutes, inside the world the story describes. This is close to what sleep does. And then there is Borobudur. If you have not heard of Borobudur, let it settle in you now as an image. It is in central Java, in what is now Indonesia, and it is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. A stone mountain, a stupa built as a mandala, a 9-terraced structure rising from a broad base to an open platform at the summit, constructed in the 8th and 9th centuries of the Common Era. The lower galleries of Borobudur carry carved reliefs, hundreds of panels, thousands of sculpted figures, and among them, arranged along the walls that a pilgrim would walk in pradaki, circumambulating level by level on the way toward the top, are the Jātaka stories and the Avadana tales, carved from panels of the Jātakamal, the garland of birth stories, so that the ascent through the monument is also an ascent through lives. You walk. You rise. The stories accompany you. People ask sometimes why Buddhism spread so far and took such hold across so many different cultures, across India and Sri Lanka, into Southeast Asia, into Java and Sumatra and Bali, up through the silk routes into Central Asia and China, out into Japan and Korea and Tibet, and the question has many answers. But one answer, If you look at the physical evidence of what was actually built and painted and carved and performed, is simpler than the theological ones. The stories were good. The stories were genuinely, enduringly good, in the way that the best stories always are, recognizable, low in cruelty, high in meaning, populated by beings who faced difficulty and chose something decent anyway. You could tell them to a child. You could tell them to someone grieving. You could have them carved on a wall where they would outlast the voice that first spoke them by 20 centuries. This is what you are inside tonight. A tradition of storytelling so old and so well loved that it is still here, still being told, still carrying its lives from one darkness to the next. So let us continue walking. There is a story of an elephant. He was white, not entirely white, in the way that rare things often fall just short of the absolute, but white enough to shimmer, white enough to make anyone who saw him stop walking and stand still for a moment. And he had 6 tusks. This is the detail the story keeps. 6 tusks, the colour of new ivory, curving in the particular way of things that have grown a long time in the quiet. He was called Ajanta, and he was, as you will by now expect, the Bodhisatta, the being in one more form, in one more life, gathering patiently the qualities that would take a great many more lives yet to complete. Ajanta lived in a forest near a lake, and he led a herd of 8,000 elephants. He had 2 wives, which is how the story frames it, 2 companions among the herd who were nearest to him. One was named Masubhad, and the other was named Kasubhad. For a long time they lived together in the old, unhurried way of beings, whose world is forest and water and the long arc of seasons. But something shifted. It is not always clear, in these stories, what causes a heart to close. The tales do not dwell on the mechanics of resentment the way our modern minds might. They simply note it, the way you might note a change in weather. It was different now. Kasubhad had grown distant, then cold, then quietly bitter, in the particular way of someone who has decided, perhaps not even consciously, that she has received less than she deserved. One day, when Ajanta offered a particular flowering branch, a gift, an ordinary gesture of care, to Masubhad instead of to her, something settled into hardness in Kasubhad's heart. The story does not excuse this, but it does not condemn it either. It simply says, this is what happened. She made a wish. This is how the tales work. Wishes have weight, intentions have consequence. And a being who concentrates the force of a strong intention at the moment of death carries it forward. Kasubhad died, was reborn as a human princess, grew up in a kingdom far away, and remembered with the particular clarity that sometimes comes in dreams or in the wordless knowledge of the body, that she had unfinished feeling with a great white elephant with 6 tusks. She became a queen, and she sent for a hunter. The hunter's name was Sāñcī. She told him what she wanted, the 6 tusks of the elephant called Ajanta. She did not explain why. There are desires that do not need explaining to the people we send to carry them out. Sāñcī went into the forest for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. This is the time the story gives him, before he found the lake where Ajanta lived. He dug a pit at the edge of the water. He dressed in the robes of a monk, because Ajanta and all his kind had always treated the robes with reverence, and Sāñcī understood this. When Ajanta came to drink, Sāñcī shot him with a poisoned arrow from the pit. The arrow found its mark, and here is where the story turns into something quietly extraordinary. Ajanta did not charge. He did not use his size or his strength or his tusks to destroy the man who had shot him. He moved toward the pit, And he looked at the hunter, and he felt not rage, but something that in another kind of story might seem like it made no sense at all. He felt concern. He wanted to know who had sent this man, not in order to plan revenge, in order to understand. He knelt. He helped the hunter, who was now trembling, climb out of the pit. And when the hunter told him, a queen, far away, who needs your tusks, Ajanta understood. And he tried to help him with the task. The tusks were long and curved and difficult. Sāñcī could not saw through them. Ajanta, the poison already in him, raised his own trunk and took the saw himself and helped with the cutting, turning the blade in the direction of each tusk until both came free. He did not ask for mercy. He did not ask to be spared. He asked only that when the hunter brought the tusks to the queen, they be offered with care. Sāñcī wept. He was carrying, by the end, not a trophy but a weight. He brought the tusks back to the queen. He placed them before her. And the story says simply that she looked at them, and something in her, whatever had been clenched in that old resentment all those years and lives, let go. She died not long after, of grief or release or both. The story does not fully distinguish between them. This is Sāñcī, patience, not the patience of endurance, of gritting the teeth and getting through, the patience of remaining recognizably yourself under conditions that would give almost anyone permission to abandon that self entirely. The patience of the being who, even poisoned, even in pain, reaches for the saw and helps complete the thing being done to him because he has already decided what kind of being he is, and no circumstance has the power to unmake that decision. You may have met this quality in smaller ways. The moment when you are hurt and you could respond with the full weight of what you feel. And something in you, some quieter part, chooses differently, not because it is weak. Because it is, in some way you cannot entirely explain, more essentially you than the hurt is. That is the teaching this story offers, and it offers it not through argument, but through the image of a great white elephant in the forest, helping a man saw off his own tusks in the gentlest way he can. Let that image stay as long as it wants to, and when you are ready, let the next story come. There are 547 lives after all, and we have barely touched the edges of the wall. There was once a prince. His name was Jātaka, and he was the rightful heir to a kingdom that no longer existed, because his father had been killed and the throne had been taken before Jātaka was old enough to claim it. He grew up in another city, raised by his mother in quiet exile, knowing who he was without yet knowing what to do about it. When he was old enough, he decided to go and reclaim what was his. This required money, or at least resources, and so he arranged passage on a merchant ship crossing the great ocean. He was not the only passenger. There were many, and the ship was full of goods, and for a while the crossing went as crossings do, the water wide, the horizon unbroken, the days measured by the angle of the light. Then the ship broke. There was a storm, or simply the accumulated weight of too many goods in too old a hull, and the ship began to take on water, and then it went down. People cried out. People tried to hold on to pieces of wood. One by one, the story says, they slipped below the surface. Jātaka watched this happen around him. He made no great speech about it. He did not resolve the situation or save the other passengers through cleverness or force. He simply kept swimming. He swam for 7 days. 7 days in the open ocean, alone, with no land visible in any direction. The sea was full of creatures, the story mentions fish, and the text notes that he swam through waters that would have terrified almost anyone. He was not unafraid. Fear is not the thing the story is testing. What the story is testing is something else, what you do with fear after you have acknowledged it, when there is nothing to do but continue. So he continued. He swam through the night. He swam through the heat of the day. He swam when his body wanted to stop and his mind could find no particular reason to go on. The shores of the kingdom he was trying to reach were not visible. He had no way of knowing how much farther they were or whether they existed in any direction he was currently moving. He had only the direction he had started in and the quality in him that said, "Keep going." This is virya. Energy, sometimes translated as effort or courage or perseverance. But in the Jataka stories, it is something more specific than willpower, more grounded than optimism. It is the quality of continuing when continuation has stopped making rational sense, because some deeper layer of the being has not yet decided to stop, and that layer is, it turns out, the one that matters. On the seventh day, a sea goddess noticed him. Her name in the tradition is Maimekal, though in other tellings she is simply a deity of the waters who had been watching. She had seen many people try. She had seen most of them give up. This one, still moving, still oriented, still somehow intact after 7 days, caught her attention in the way that things catch attention when they are rare. She lifted him from the water. She carried him to the shore of the kingdom he had been trying to reach. He arrived. He eventually became king. The rest of the story is longer and has its own complications, as kingdoms do. But the part that stayed, the part that was painted at Ajanta and carved in the memory of the tradition, is the 7 days of swimming. The not stopping, when there was no particular reason to continue, except that continuing was what there was to do. Thousands of years later, in the 20th century, a king named Bhumibol Adulyadej, who ruled Thailand as Rama the Next, returned to this story. He wrote his own version of the Mahjanaka Jataka, published in 1996, illustrated and composed in the old style. He returned to it, people said, because he found in it something he needed. The idea that you keep going, not because success is guaranteed, but because stopping is simply not what this kind of being does. He offered it to his people as a king who took the story seriously enough to retell it, in his own hand, in his own time. This is what these stories do. They travel. They surface in different centuries with the same root message intact. A prince swimming an ocean 2,000 years ago and a 20th century monarch sitting with the same image, finding in it the thing he needed to carry what he was carrying. You are allowed to find in it whatever you need tonight. Whatever ocean you are currently swimming, whatever distance you are not yet sure you can cover. The 7th day is not visible from the first. That is the nature of 7th days. You will not know you are there until you are, and by then the goddess will already have her arms around you, and the shore will already be underneath your feet. Take a breath. Notice the quiet. Let the ocean settle. There is a different kind of story now, softer and simpler, and it will come to you easily if you let it. There was once a goose with feathers made of gold, not metaphorically gold, gold the way the stories mean it, each feather genuinely, unmistakably the colour and the weight of the metal, so that anyone who saw him could not mistake what they were seeing. He had been a man in a previous life, a man who had worked hard and shared what he had, and practiced his generosity with some regularity, and now here he was, the Bodhisatta again. In another form, a golden goose living in the marshes, beautiful and mild. He had a family, He had daughters in this telling, and a wife, and they were not golden. They were ordinary geese, living in an ordinary way, and they had less than they needed. He knew this, and so one day he flew to them. He knew where they were, because these things are known in the story world, where the heart navigates by something steadier than a dress or map, and he offered them one of his golden feathers. Just one. "Take this," he said. "Sell it. It will be enough for now. And when you need more, I will come again." He came again. And again, each time he left a feather, and each time they sold it, and each time they had what they needed. He did not disappear. He did not give everything at once. He came, he gave, he returned. This is also a teaching about dana, about generosity, not the dramatic, giving everything away of the Sibi or the Vesantara, but the quieter form, showing up, repeatedly, over time, in proportion to what is needed, never making the gift into something the giver owns. But the mother, and the story focuses on her, which is worth noting, because it is her choice that drives everything, began to think about the future. What if, she thought, what if he comes one day and cannot come again? What if he flies over water and is lost? We are dependent on him and his timing and his willingness. What if we could secure ourselves against uncertainty? She decided, the next time he came, to take all the feathers at once. The goose arrived, calm as he always arrived. She took him in her hands gently, the story says, which makes it somehow worse, the gentleness. And she pulled out every feather she could reach. She meant to leave him nothing. But this is a story, and stories know things that the people inside them do not. The feathers, once pulled from a golden goose against his will, lost their colour. They came away dull and grey and ordinary, worth nothing to anyone, good only for the inside of a pillow. And the goose was left bare, unable to fly, sitting in a basket, while new feathers slowly grew in, grey ones, ordinary ones, none of them gold. He waited. He stayed with them. He did not fly away when his feathers returned, or not immediately. The story does not make him abandon her, but neither does it give back the gold. The gold was in the relationship, the story suggests, in the rhythmic giving and the return and the trust between the giver and the given to. When the trust broke, not broken by cruelty, but by fear, which is almost always what breaks trust, the fear of losing what one has been given, the thing that made it valuable, dissolved as well. This is the Suvahasa Jataka, the golden goose story. It entered the world's storehouse of fables. You may know a version of it from somewhere else, some other tradition, some other corner of childhood, because the image is so precise and so true. We all, at some point, have been handed something luminous and tried to secure it against loss by holding too tightly, and the holding, the tightening of the grip, is exactly what the story says costs us the thing. The teaching is quiet. Contentment is not passivity. It is the quality of receiving what comes, in the rhythm it arrives, without the fear of scarcity that turns receiving into grabbing. The goose came back. He would have kept coming back. What was needed was not more feathers, but the patience to be given to. Let that land gently. There is no pressure in it. It is only an old image, a golden bird flying over marsh water in a time before any of us existed, and a woman who loved her daughters and was afraid, and the ordinary, human, understandable thing that fear makes us do. We have all pulled feathers out of something we loved, and the goose, in most versions of this, is still there. There is one more story for this passage of the night. It is shorter than the others. It does not have a single central figure in the way the Monkey King does, or the six-tusked elephant, or the swimming prince. It is more like a piece of practical wisdom dropped into a frame, and the frame is this: a caravan, a desert, and the moment when stopping seems like the only reasonable option. The Vopatha Jataka, sometimes translated simply as the desert crossing tale, the caravan tale, the story of the guide who kept his people moving. A merchant was leading a caravan across a great desert. Many people, many goods, many animals, the whole assembled weight of a trading life in motion. These crossings were done at night to avoid the heat, and the guide navigated by the stars. After a long time in the dark, moving through sand that all looked the same, the caravan halted. They had run out of water. The water pots were empty. The animals were thirsty. The people were beginning to lose heart in the way that people lose heart in extreme circumstances, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, the energy draining away like water into sand, until sitting down seemed more plausible than continuing. The guide did not sit down. He studied the ground. He noticed something. The kind of small, easy-to-miss sign that only someone who is still paying attention can see: a clump of grass. Grass does not grow without moisture somewhere below. He called for digging. The people dug. They dug and found nothing but more sand, and some of them stopped, and some of them said there was nothing here, and some of them sat down among their goods and let the despair settle in fully. Because despair, once invited, is a comfortable enough guest in the short term. The guide kept digging, or more precisely, he kept directing the digging, kept marking where the grass had been, kept insisting on this particular spot and not another, kept saying, "One more foot, just one more foot." At some depth that the story does not precisely quantify, but delivers as a moment of sudden relief. The sound of water, rock, and then the sound of water. They dug to it, and it rose. Enough for the caravan, enough for the animals, enough to continue. The guide was the Bodhisatta in that life. The teaching is adihna, resolve, determination, the quality of knowing what you are doing and refusing to stop doing it in the absence of visible proof that it is working. Dig one more foot. This is the whole sermon in 4 words, and the story earns those 4 words by showing you first exactly how it feels to be in the desert at night with empty water pots and sand in every direction and no particular reason to keep going. The story earns the instruction by not pretending the despair wasn't real. Of course it was real. Of course sitting down seemed reasonable. Everything in the situation argued for rest. And yet, one more foot. You will know, if you have ever been somewhere that felt like that desert, and most of us have been there, if not in sand, then in other kinds of terrain, that the moment when you found water, or its equivalent, was almost always one more attempt past the point where you had already decided to stop. Almost always. The grass was there, the sign was there, you just hadn't dug to it yet. The story does not ask you to be certain, it does not ask you to feel hopeful, it asks only that you pick up the shovel one more time. The water is either there or it isn't, and you will know in a foot. You will know in a foot. Rest in that for a moment, take a slow, deep breath in, and let it out slowly. Feel the weight of the body wherever it is resting. The bed or the floor or the pillow, whatever is holding you. Notice that you are being held, that the surface beneath you is doing its work without being asked, simply receiving, simply staying. Quick reminder, after years of lying awake with a racing mind, deep sleep finally became possible. Now learning comes easier, energy is real, and the mind stays sharp. Sleeping like a baby changed everything. If you want the exact system that made this possible, check the link in the pinned comments. When you are ready, we will continue together. The stories are still there, the river of lives is still moving. The same being, the Bodhisatta, is still somewhere in the current, wearing yet another shape, practicing yet another perfection in yet another world. And we will find him again, in a moment, in the lives that are still waiting just ahead. For now, simply breathe, simply rest. The water is there, you have dug to it. Let yourself be carried for a little while on this current, in this dark, among all these ancient and particular lives, toward morning. There is one more life to find before we rest in the forest with the Monkey King and the Golden Deer and all the others we have already met tonight. This one comes from a different telling, not the Pāli commentary, but the Sanskrit Jātaka, the garland of birth stories, composed by a poet named Rāya somewhere around the 4th century of the Common Era. Rāya was a careful craftsman. He chose 34 tales from the vast river of Jataka tradition and shaped them into something closer to poetry than transcript, each story held in ornate verse and measured prose. And among those 34, one has stayed with the Buddhist world longer than almost any other. It is carved into the cliff faces of Ajanta. It is painted into the galleries of Borobudur. It is told to children and to adults, in the dark, when something needs to be understood about what it means to give everything. It is the story of the prince and the hungry tigress, the Via Jataka, the birth story of the tigress. Let us explore it now, gently, the way Rāya intended, not as a horror, not as a shock, but as a lesson in what compassion actually is when it has been taken all the way to its roots. The Bodhisatta was born, in this life, as a young prince. He had 2 older brothers, and the 3 of them walked one afternoon into a deep forest. It was the kind of forest that feels very old and very quiet, the kind where the light comes down in columns and the leaves barely move, and you find yourself speaking more softly without being asked. The brothers walked together until the 2 older ones drew ahead, following the path. The Bodhisatta slowed. He heard something. It came from a ravine just below the path. A sound that was not quite a cry and not quite a silence, something between those 2 things. He went toward it. At the bottom of the ravine, on bare rock, lay a tigress. She had recently given birth to her cubs. There were 2 of them, very small, pressing close against her sides, but the tigress had nothing to give them. She had not eaten in a long time, too long. She was too weak to hunt and too weak to nurse, and her cubs were pressing against her with the blind, desperate intensity of young animals who do not yet know what hunger is, only that something is wrong, only that something is missing. The tigress lay on the rock and did not move. She was looking at nothing. Her ribs were visible. The cubs made small sounds. The forest was very quiet around all 3 of them. The Bodhisatta stood at the edge of the ravine and looked down. He understood what he was seeing. He understood what would happen if nothing changed. He also understood, and this is the part that matters, the part Rāya took care to preserve, that he felt no drama about it, no grand internal monologue, no weighing of options. What he felt, standing at the edge of that ravine, was simply a clear recognition: here is a creature in need. Here is something I can do. He climbed down. The tigress later would be identified by the Buddha's samodna, the closing recognition, as someone who would in a future life herself become a great being. The cubs would be recognized as other members of the Sangha, the community. The story does not tell us this to make the offering transactional. It tells us this to say, suffering finds its resolution across time, across many lives, and the act of responding to it, even one small act, even one moment of genuine presence in the face of another creature's need, sends its effects forward through time in ways we cannot see from where we are standing. The Bodhisatta descended into the ravine. He lay down near the tigress. The cubs, sensing warmth, moved toward him. The tigress, too spent even for fear, simply lay. What happened next is told in the tradition with an image of great peace. Not violence, not despair. Peace, because this is the Jataka reading of the act. Not loss, but gift. Not ending, but continuation. The Bodhisatta, the being who will become the Buddha, who has been practicing this for lifetimes, who has already been a hare, who threw himself into a fire, and a monkey king who made his body into a bridge, understood that what is given in this way does not diminish anything that is essential. The self that mattered was not the body. The self that mattered was the quality being perfected. And generosity, dna, was being perfected here, in this ravine, in this forest, on this bare rock, without witness and without audience. The tigress and her cubs lived. They rose from that ravine, eventually, and moved back into the forest. And somewhere in the current of time, the being that had been the Bodhisatta went on, carrying that moment with him the way a river carries a stone, slowly, without effort, turning it smooth. That is the Vir Jātaka. That is what Ria Ra preserved. Not a lesson about self-destruction, not an instruction to give until you break. A story about what it looks like when compassion, karu, imply the particular quality that responds to suffering the way water responds to downhill, is no longer theoretical. When it has become so practiced, so woven into the fabric of what a being is, that it arises without deliberation, without performance, without even a great deal of visible struggle. It simply rises and moves toward the need, the way water moves, downhill, without being asked. You do not need to do anything with this tonight. The teaching is not that you should give your life away in a ravine. The teaching is something quieter, something more like a question. What would it feel like if your kindness toward others, even a small, everyday kindness, arose that naturally? Not forced, not performed. Simply there, the way warmth is there when you put your hand near a flame. Already present, already reaching outward. Let that question rest somewhere in you without needing an answer tonight. There is another story. This one is called the Jātaka, and it is one of the oldest in the tradition, carved into the relief panels at Brut, that ancient red sandstone stupa in the heart of India, more than 2,000 years ago. Pilgrims walked past it. They stopped. They looked up at the carved stone and recognized it, because they had already heard it told. That is how old this story is. That is how far it goes. The Bodhisatta was a king in this life, a king named Ibi, who ruled well and was known throughout his kingdom for giving refuge. That word, refuge, matters here. In the Buddhist understanding, one of the most fundamental gifts anyone can give is the gift of safety. Abhaya, in plea, the absence of fear, the promise that what has come seeking shelter will be sheltered. King Ibi was a king who gave abhaya. That was his nature and his practice. One evening, a dove came to him. It came very fast, out of the open sky, and it landed not at the door of his palace, but directly in his hands, the way a frightened animal will sometimes land on a human being when it is desperate enough to trust something it would normally flee. The dove was shaking. Its heartbeat was visible in its small chest. It pressed itself against the king's palms and looked up at him with eyes that were, in that moment, the eyes of something that has decided to believe. The king closed his hands gently around the bird, and then, from behind, came the hawk. Fast, circling, calling out in a voice, because in this story the hawk speaks, as the animals in Jataka tales sometimes do, when the teaching requires it, calling out that the dove was its prey, that the dove had been promised to it by the order of hunger, by the ancient arrangement between predator and prey that had existed long before kings and kingdoms, and that the king had no right to interfere with what was simply the nature of the world. The king listened to all of this. He did not dismiss it. One of the things that makes the Ibi Jataka worth carrying is that King Ibi does not pretend the hawk's argument is nothing. He acknowledges that the hawk is also hungry. He acknowledges that the hawk has its own life to sustain, and so he says, "I will not give you the dove, but I will not leave you without food. Tell me what you need, and I will try to give it to you in another form." The hawk, who was in fact the god Sāñcī in disguise, testing the king, as Sāñcī so often tests the heroes of these stories, said, "Give me flesh, living flesh, equal in weight to the dove." The king agreed. He called for a scale. On one side he placed the dove. On the other side he began to cut flesh from his own thigh, placing it piece by piece on the scale. The dove, here, is the most tender detail. No matter how much flesh was added to the scale, the dove's sides stayed down, as though the dove weighed more than ordinary physics allowed, as though the principle it represented, the principle of refuge, of a being that has chosen to trust, weighed something that flesh alone could not match. And so King Ibi, understanding, eventually simply climbed onto the scale himself. His whole self, his whole body, offered in place of the one small, frightened bird he had chosen to protect. At that moment, Sāñcī revealed himself. The test was complete, the king was healed, the dove flew safely. And the teaching settled into the stone at Brut, where pilgrims could walk past it and understand, without anyone explaining a single word, what the story meant. It meant this: the quality of giving refuge, real refuge, the kind that costs something, is not a policy or a principle. It is a practice that goes all the way down. And when someone or something comes to you, trembling, pressing itself against your hands, asking to be safe, the practice says, "I will be the shelter," whatever that requires. There are people in your life who have been that shelter for you. You may not have named it that way, but somewhere in your past there is a moment when you were frightened and someone closed their hands around you and stayed. Let yourself feel that for a moment. The weight of having been held when you were small and uncertain and didn't know yet what would happen next. Someone stayed. That is the Ibi Jataka. That is the relief carved into the old red sandstone. That is what the pilgrims stopped to see. And now we come to the last of the great tales. The one the tradition calls number 547, the Vesantara Jātaka, which sits at the end of the long sequence called the Maharashtra, the Great Chapter, and which has been described across Buddhist Asia as the most beloved of all the birth stories. It is the Bodhisatta's penultimate human life before the final one in which he becomes the Buddha, and it is the fullest unfolding of na, generosity, that the tradition offers. I will not take you through the whole of it tonight. The Vesantara Jātaka is, in its full telling, an epic. In Thailand, there is a festival called the Thet Mahahat, the preaching of the great life, in which the entire Jātaka is chanted across 13 chapters in a single day, monks and lay people gathered together. the community holding the story between them like something precious and heavy. In Laos, the same occasion is called Bun Phawet, and villages may spend days in preparation, and the merit accumulated by hearing the whole story through is considered among the greatest a person can receive. The full telling would take us many hours more than we have tonight. But there are two moments in the Vesantara Jataka that belong to this hour. Two moments that, even lifted gently from their full context, carry everything the story wants to say. The first is the giving of the elephant. Prince Vesantara, the Bodhisatta in this life, was the heir of a prosperous kingdom, and the kingdom possessed a white elephant. Not just any elephant, this was the rain-bringing elephant. The elephant whose presence was understood to be connected, in some way that went beyond ordinary explanation, to the well-being of the land. When the elephant walked in procession, rain followed. When the kingdom was dry, the elephant's calm was a kind of reassurance. The people knew this elephant, loved it, understood it as part of what made their homes safe and whole. Brahmins came one day from a neighbouring kingdom that was suffering a great drought. They had walked a long way, they were thin and tired, and they came to Vesantara not with demands, but with a simple, naked request: "Our people are suffering. We have heard you are generous. We are asking if you have something you could give." Vesantara looked at them. He looked at the white elephant standing in the courtyard of the palace, calm and enormous, its great head swaying very slightly, its eyes dark and quiet. He understood what giving the elephant meant. He understood what it would cost him. He understood what the people of his own kingdom would say and feel and fear. He gave the elephant. He walked it out himself, placed the ceremonial vessel of water in the Brahmin's hands as the traditional gesture of gift-giving, and watched them lead it away. The white elephant went without protest. It walked beside the Brahmins down the road and out of the kingdom, and the kingdom stood at the roadside and watched it go. The people were devastated. They were afraid. They went to the king, Vesantara's father, and they said, "Your son has given away the rain." The king, who loved his son but loved his people also, listened to them. And Vesantara was sent into exile into the forest, with his wife Mad and their 2 young children, to live as an ascetic. There is much that happens in that forest. The full story holds more darkness than we need tonight. But what we need is the end of it, because the Jātaka, every Jātaka, moves toward resolution. It moves toward the moment when what was given away is given back, transformed. When the price of generosity is shown to be not a final loss, but a passage through loss towards something that was always, at some deeper level, already safe. Mad finds her way back to him. The children find their way home. The kingdom, facing its own long season of consequences and reflection, sends messengers into the forest. The old king, his hair now white, makes the journey himself, the long walk through the trees to find his son. And Vesantara, who gave away an elephant, who gave away his wealth, who gave away everything he had been given and everything he had built, who practiced toraṇa so completely and without reservation that it must have, at times, looked from the outside like something close to madness, Vesantara simply waits. Calm, clear, still inhabiting the perfection he has been working toward across many lives. This being who was once a hare, who was once a monkey king, who was once a golden deer, still working, still refining, still giving. The reunion is gentle, quiet, the forest around them. That is the moment the tradition chose to end on. Not the drama. The reunion, the still, forested quiet of people who have moved through something immense and come out the other side into a morning that is simply a morning, ordinary and whole. It is number 547, the very last of the great lives before the final one. And everything it needed to say, it said through story. Through what happened, not through instruction. Through consequence, not commandment. Let yourself rest in that for a moment. The idea that the thing being practiced, the quality being slowly, patiently, across many lives and many forms, cultivated, was not something added to the Bodhisatta from outside. It was something emerging from within, made stronger each time it was used, the way a muscle is made stronger, not by rest but by the gentle, patient work of being asked to give what it has. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the forest settle around you, Vesantara's forest, full of birds and light through the leaves and the small sounds of a family that has found its way back to each other. And when you are ready, we will move to the last story. The last story of tonight is the one I want to leave you with, because it is the gentlest. It does not involve sacrifice or exile or any of the great difficult moments that the Bodhisatta has moved through in other lives. It is a story about 3 animals, or 4 depending on the telling, sitting together under a tree and asking a very simple question: who has been here longest? This is the story called, in various tellings across Buddhist Asia, the tale of the harmonious friends. Sometimes it appears in the Titira Jataka, the partridge birth story. Sometimes it includes 3 animals, sometimes 4. In Tibetan and Bhutanese art, it has become one of the most reproduced images in the entire tradition, painted on monastery walls, on thankas, on the inside of ordinary homes, because the image it produces is one of great calm and right order. Let us explore it now. There was a great banyan tree. It grew at the edge of a forest, enormous and old, its branches spreading wide enough that the area beneath it felt almost like a room, a green, shifting, shaded room. 3 animals had made their home near this tree for as long as any of them could remember: a partridge, a monkey, and an elephant. They lived well together, as neighbours do when they are paying attention to each other. They shared the space without too much difficulty. But after a while, as tends to happen when creatures live in close proximity, a small tension began to grow. Not a bitter one, not a mean one, more like the natural question that arises between people who have known each other long enough to stop making assumptions. Who, exactly, has been here longest? Who has prior claim? The partridge thought it had arrived first. The monkey believed it had. The elephant was certain the tree had been its territory long before either of the others appeared. And so they decided to find out, the way wise animals in Jātaka tales always find out. They asked the tree. Not the tree itself. Trees in most of these stories do not speak directly, though they sometimes shelter those who do. They asked what the tree could tell them by its own measure. The elephant said, "When I first came to this place, this banyan tree was small enough that I stepped over it." The monkey said, "When I first came here, this banyan tree was small enough that I sat on it and ate from its top branches while keeping my feet on the ground." The partridge said, "When I first came to this place, I ate a seed here, on bare ground. From that seed, this tree grew." And so they knew the partridge had been there the longest. It had arrived before there was even a tree to mark the spot. And the monkey and the elephant, when they understood this, did not argue and did not resist. They accepted it. They arranged themselves differently under the tree, the elephant making space for the monkey making space for the partridge. and they settled into a right and harmonious order, each one caring for the others according to the role that genuine seniority and proper regard required. In the Tibetan and Bhutanese painting tradition, this image is usually depicted with a fourth animal, a hare, sitting at the base of the elephant's leg, included in the circle. Because the hare, by this point in the tradition, is already understood as one of the shapes the Bodhisatta takes. It belongs in the circle, it belongs near the tree, and so the four of them appear together in paintings, generation after generation, in the simplest possible arrangement: a tree, four animals, a certain quality of afternoon light. The story is called The Tale of Harmonious Friends because what it describes at its heart is not just the resolution of a small territorial dispute, it describes the condition that makes harmony possible. Not equality in the sense of sameness. The four animals are not the same. They have different sizes and different histories and different roles, but a right relationship between differences, grounded in honest reckoning with what came before. Grava, the quality the Jātaka is teaching, is sometimes translated as reverence or as respect for seniority, or as a quality of right regard, the capacity to recognize what deserves to be honored and to honor it, not because you are told to, but because you see clearly. And seeing clearly changes how you hold yourself. And notice what makes this story work as a teaching. Nobody had to say be harmonious. Nobody delivered a lecture on the virtue of cooperation. The situation resolved itself when the animals were honest about what they actually knew and didn't know, and willing to accept the answer that came. The lesson rose from the events, the way every Jataka lesson does. The way water rises from the ground when you dig far enough. In some tellings, the four animals of this story, the hare, the partridge, the monkey, the elephant, live out the rest of their days under the banyan tree in a kind of quiet, steady, unremarkable kindness toward each other. They share food, they warn each other of danger. They sit together in the evenings when the light is low and the forest is at its quietest, each one simply present, simply there. Not dramatic, not heroic, just there, in right relationship, for as long as they live. That is the last story. There are more than 500 lives in the tradition, and we have walked past only a few of them tonight. A few carvings on the wall of a very long stone corridor. But I think you have a sense now of what the river looks like. The way the same being keeps returning, wearing different shapes, in different forests and different palaces and different centuries and different languages, always practicing, always refining, always trying again. A hare, a monkey, a golden deer, a six-tusked elephant. A king of extraordinary patience, a prince who gave everything away, a partridge who arrived first, before there was even a tree. And something else I want to leave you with, quietly, before we close. These were never esoteric texts. They were never sealed away in libraries for scholars. The Jataka tales were, for 2,000 years, the bedtime stories of Buddhist Asia. The stories parents told their children before sleep. The images painted on the walls of the caves at Ajanta so that ordinary people who came to pray could walk past them by lamplight and know them the way you know a story you heard before you could read. The images wrapped around the great stone mountain of Borobudur so that pilgrims could read them by walking slowly. The way you walk when you are trying to understand something. One foot, and then the other, one panel, and then the next, the whole long circuit of lives unfolding as you moved. This is what pradaki means, the slow, meditative walking of the story, reading it with your whole body. In the dark, arriving at the end of the circuit back at the beginning. understanding something differently than you did before. That is exactly what you have been doing tonight. You have been walking slowly. You have been letting one panel become the next, one life flow into the next, the same being returning in a new form each time, each form a little more refined, a little more patient, a little more willing to give what needs to be given. You do not need to remember any of it. If what stays with you is simply the image of a hare standing at the edge of a fire, or a monkey arching his body across a wide and dark river, or a golden deer raising his head and meeting the king's eye without fear, or 4 animals sitting together under a banyan tree in the last light of an afternoon, if one image stayed, let that be enough. The images were designed to stay. They have been staying in the minds of sleeping people for 2,000 years. We have met the hare who threw himself into the fire and whose shadow is still, tonight, on the face of the moon. We have met the monkey king who made a bridge of his own body. We have met the golden deer who offered his life for a pregnant doe and moved a king toward mercy. We have met the 6-tusked elephant who helped the hunter remove his own tusks, patient and forgiving under betrayal. We have met the caravan leader who trusted the ground when no one else would, and found water in the earth 1 foot below where everyone had stopped. We have met the prince in the ravine who lay down beside a starving tigress and her cubs. We have met King Ibi, who climbed onto the scale beside the dove that had pressed itself into his hands. We have met Vesantara, who gave the white elephant away and waited in the forest, and was found again in a morning that smelled of trees and long patience. We have met the partridge and the monkey and the elephant and the small hare at the base of the tree, sitting together in right relationship, simply present, simply there. These are the Jataka tales. Birth stories, 547 of them in the Old Ply collection. More in the Sanskrit garland of Riara. More in the Chinese canon and the Tibetan tradition. More, perhaps, than anyone has ever counted, because a tradition that teaches through story tends to keep finding new stories to tell, new shapes for the same patient being to wear, new lives in which the same lesson can be learned one more time. You have been the pilgrim tonight. You have walked slowly around the base of the great monument, reading the carvings as they passed. You have done exactly what the tradition intended. You have let the stories come to you in the dark, without effort, without needing to analyze or apply or memorize, simply receiving them the way the ground receives water, the way the moon received the hare's image, the way the banyan tree received the seed that the partridge dropped before there was even a tree to speak of. The river of lives goes on. There are more tales in it than we will ever reach in one night, or in many nights. But the ones you have heard are enough. They always were. And look, the hare's shadow is still on the face of the moon. It has been there since the moment Saka pressed it there with his finger, moved by what he had witnessed in that small clearing. Centuries and centuries before you were born. It will be there tomorrow night, and the night after, and on all the nights of your life when you happen to look up. A small and patient shape, carrying something that cannot be carried by any body, only by what the body chose to do. Let your body be still now. Let the forest settle. Let the river slow. Let the carvings on the walls of Ajanta rest in the dark behind their doors, those long painted panels of colour and story, and let the great galleries of Borobudur be quiet in the night of Java, the pilgrim's path empty, the stones warm from a day of sun. Let Nanda and Sriputta and Rula and all the others who appear in the Samodhana, the closing recognition, sit quietly in whatever morning waits ahead of them. Let Devadatta rest. Let the white elephant walk somewhere in a green and unhurried place, its great head swaying slightly, rain following softly in its footsteps. Let the partridge sleep in the branches of its tree. Let the monkey sleep in the upper boughs. Let the elephant sleep on its feet at the foot of the trunk, patient and enormous, breathing slowly. Let the small hare sleep curled at its side, ears folded, eyes closed. They are all at rest. You have walked with them tonight, one panel and then the next, one life and then the next, one being practicing one more perfection in one more form, over and over, patient and particular, never arriving by force, always arriving by steadiness, by the slow accumulation of kindness upon kindness upon kindness, until something essential in the world is changed. That is what you have been hearing. That is what has been moving through you as you lay here, in the dark, on whatever surface is holding you right now, simply receiving. You are already doing it, you know. Simply by lying here, simply by breathing, simply by letting the stories come and carry you, you are participating in the oldest human practice there is. Being still, being held, letting the night do what it was made to do. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.